They thought I was broke. I had already bought the majority share of their own company. The polished oak doors of Innovate Solutions felt like a tomb entrance. Every hushed whisper, every sidelong glance was a fresh stab in the back. They had cheered me, Elias, their star innovator, their visionary. Then, with calculated smiles and twisted words, they had dragged me through the mud, painting me as a failure, a bankrupt fool. I remembered the board meeting, the way their eyes, usually so full of greed, now glinted with a cold satisfaction as they declared me out. My own creation, the company I poured my heart and soul into, was being taken from me. They stripped me of my title, my office, my very dignity, all while I stood there, a statue carved from shock and disbelief. Outside, the headlines screamed my supposed downfall. Elias Thorne, Tech Titan tumbles. Innovate Solutions cuts ties with defunct founder. It was a performance they had orchestrated, a theatrical humiliation designed to break me completely, and for a while it worked. I disappeared. I moved to a small, unassuming apartment in a forgotten part of the city, where the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the creak of my own solitude. I sold my fancy cars, my designer clothes, anything that screamed success. I learned to live on a shoestring budget, to cook simple meals, to walk instead of taking cabs. The public saw a man reduced to ashes, a cautionary tale. They saw Elias Thorne, the broken dreamer, the financial wreck. They saw exactly what I wanted them to see. The irony, of course, was delicious. As they celebrated their victory, reveling in their newfound control, I was quietly, meticulously, weaving a tapestry of their own undoing. While they were busy dividing my supposed spoils, I was a ghost in the digital realm, a phantom investor. The brokers, the ones who dealt in anonymity, they were my silent partners. My old network, the one I had built with loyalty and trust, remained fiercely loyal, even when they thought I was at my lowest. They understood. They saw the injustice, and they helped me. Every single penny I had, every last bit of severance they grudgingly gave me, every dime I scraped together from the sale of my non-essential assets, it all went into this. Into buying slivers of Innovate Solutions stock. Small, insignificant percentages. So small that they would never raise a red flag. I used shell companies, a labyrinth of them, each with its own anonymous director, its own vague purpose. Each one a tiny, seemingly insignificant shareholder. I bought from disgruntled employees who felt undervalued. I bought from small, independent funds looking for a quick, if modest, profit. I bought from anyone willing to sell, and believe me, there were plenty. The initial phase was the hardest. The sheer volume of tiny transactions, the meticulous record-keeping, the constant vigilance. I had to ensure that no single entity, no single broker, could ever connect the dots back to me. It was a painstaking process, a chess game played in the shadows, with the fate of my former company hanging in the balance. The board, blinded by their arrogance, never suspected a thing. They were too busy congratulating themselves, too busy enjoying their power to notice the subtle shifts in ownership. They saw a fragmented shareholder base, a collection of individuals with no unifying voice. They saw a company that, in their minds, was finally free from my disruptive influence. I would spend hours poring over financial reports, identifying trends, anticipating market movements. I learned to read the subtle nuances of the stock market, to predict the impact of news cycles, to leverage the collective sentiment of the investing public. It was a different kind of innovation, a financial guerrilla warfare. The first year was a slow burn. The percentages were so small, almost laughable. 0.1% here, 0.25% there. But they added up. They accumulated like grains of sand on a vast beach. I watched the stock price fluctuate, sometimes dipping, sometimes soaring, but always with an underlying stability that I had meticulously cultivated. My shell companies were designed to be long-term holders, not speculative traders. They were designed to be patient, to wait for the right moment, to be the unwavering bedrock of my strategy. I remember one late night, sitting in my tiny apartment, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating my face. I had just completed a particularly large acquisition through one of my most complex shell entities. I looked at the spreadsheet, at the ever-growing percentage of ownership, and a small smile, a genuine smile, finally touched my lips. It was a long road, but I was on it. I was moving forward. The second year was where things began to accelerate. As my ownership stake grew, I started to become more strategic. I began to acquire larger chunks, still through different entities, but with a clearer plan. I started to identify key individuals who held significant blocks of shares, and I would discreetly approach them, using my brokers as intermediaries. The key was to remain invisible. My persona was that of the broken man, the one who had lost everything. This allowed me to operate with a level of freedom that would have been impossible if my true intentions were known. I would receive calls from former colleagues, pitying me, offering me help. I would smile, nod, and accept their empty condolences, all the while knowing that their pity was a mask for their own relief, that I was no longer a threat. The board, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly comfortable. They were implementing their own vision for Innovate Solutions, a vision that, ironically, was slowly eroding the very foundations I had built. They were cutting corners, prioritizing short-term profits over long-term innovation, and alienating the very talent that made the company thrive. I saw it all, and I let it happen. Their mistakes were my opportunities. The whispers of my financial ruin had a profound effect on the market. Investors saw a company without its visionary founder, a company that was rudderless. This created a perception of instability, and it drove down the stock price. For them, it was a sign of my complete failure. For me, it was a golden opportunity. I was buying at a discount, acquiring more shares for less money. The more they celebrated my downfall, the more they inadvertently fueled my rise. My network of brokers, all sworn to secrecy, worked tirelessly. They were masters of disguise, shifting money between accounts, creating layers of obfuscation. It was like building a massive, invisible dam, piece by piece, with each small acquisition a single stone. The pressure was building, though no one on the other side of that dam could feel it. I was the unseen architect of their future downfall, and the irony was a powerful fuel. The financial world is a complex ecosystem, and understanding its currents is crucial. I had spent years studying it, not just as a means to an end, but as a passion. This knowledge, combined with my technical expertise, allowed me to anticipate the market's reactions to the board's decisions. Their focus on aggressive cost-cutting, while superficially impressive on quarterly reports, was actually alienating key clients and stifling the research and development that had been the company's lifeblood. This created a negative market sentiment, which in turn drove down the stock price. Every time they made a decision that I knew would hurt the company in the long run, it was a gift to me. It meant I could acquire more shares at a lower price. I was essentially buying back my own company, piece by piece, using the very money they had taken from me. Or rather, the money that was rightfully mine. The board's arrogance was their greatest weakness. They believed themselves to be untouchable. They had convinced themselves that my removal was a permanent victory, a purging of the unpredictable element. They never considered the possibility that I might have a backup plan, or that I was capable of strategic thinking beyond the immediate. They saw my public persona of defeat and accepted it as reality. They were so consumed by their victory that they neglected the fundamental principles of sound business management. They were treating Innovate Solutions like a personal piggy bank, rather than the complex organism it was. I watched from the sidelines, a phantom observer, as they made mistake after mistake, each one a step closer to my inevitable return. The quiet life I led was not a sign of surrender, but a period of strategic regrouping. It was the calm before the storm that I was meticulously brewing. The years melted away. 2 years. 2 long, agonizing yet ultimately rewarding years. I had endured the humiliation, the whispers, the pity. But all of it was a facade, a carefully constructed act. While they were celebrating their conquest, I was systematically dismantling their authority, not through public outcry or legal battles, but through the silent, undeniable power of ownership. I had become the majority shareholder. 51%. That was the magic number, the tipping point. The point where the game changed. The point where the hunters became the hunted. I had done it. I had bought back my company, not with a grand, public gesture, but with a quiet, calculated accumulation of power. The board, in their infinite wisdom, had given me the greatest gift imaginable. The opportunity to reclaim what was mine, using their own greed and arrogance against them. The time was coming. The pieces were in place. And soon, very soon, the world would see what they had truly done. They thought they had broken me. They were about to find out that they had only forged me into something stronger, something sharper, something far more dangerous. The invitation arrived in a plain, unmarked envelope. Inside, a formal document, embossed with the familiar Innovate Solutions logo. It was a summons to a special board meeting, scheduled for precisely 2 weeks from that day. The purpose, as stated in legalese, was to ratify the removal of Elias Thorne from all remaining advisory capacities, and to solidify the current leadership's operational autonomy. They were moving to tie up any loose ends, to ensure that my ghost would haunt their halls no longer. They wanted to make their victory official, to erase any lingering trace of my existence from the company's records. I read the words, my heart beating a steady rhythm of anticipation, not fear. The meekness I had displayed for the past 2 years was about to be shed like a snake's skin. The board meeting was held in the same opulent boardroom where I had been publicly disgraced. The polished oak table, the panoramic city view, the hushed, expectant atmosphere. It was all so familiar, and yet so different. I walked in, my posture still conveying a semblance of defeat, my gaze downcast. The board members were already seated, their faces a mixture of smug satisfaction and forced politeness. Their usual ringleader, a man named Arthur, who had been the loudest in his pronouncements of my failure, sat at the head of the table, his chest puffed out with self-importance. He offered a curt nod in my direction, a gesture that was meant to be magnanimous but reeked of condescension. "Elias, glad you could make it," Arthur said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "We're just finalizing a few administrative matters today. Nothing for you to worry your head about, just making sure everything is above board, as they say." A ripple of suppressed amusement went through the other board members. They exchanged knowing glances, their eyes reflecting a shared understanding of my supposed helplessness. They had invited me, I realized, not out of any respect, but as a final, public spectacle, a chance to witness my complete and utter irrelevance. It was a calculated move, designed to further humiliate me, to solidify their narrative of my downfall. I kept my head bowed, my expression one of quiet resignation. Inside, however, a storm was brewing. My hands, clasped in my lap, were clammy, but not with fear. It was the tremor of excitement, the electric hum of impending triumph. The meeting proceeded as expected. Arthur droned on about quarterly reports, about new marketing strategies, about the excellent progress the company had made since my departure. Each word was a testament to their blind arrogance. They spoke of innovation, but their ideas were stale, derivative. They spoke of growth, but their methods were unsustainable, greedy. They were like children playing with a powerful engine, unaware of the damage they were doing. I listened, my mind already miles ahead, rehearsing the words I would speak, picturing the look on their faces when the truth finally dawned. Then came the moment. Arthur cleared his throat, signaling the transition to the agenda item that concerned me. "Now," he announced, his voice taking on a more business-like tone. "We come to item number 3. The formal ratification of Mr. Thorne's removal from any advisory roles and the consolidation of our ownership structure." He gestured to the corporate secretary, a young woman named Sarah, who sat with a stack of documents. "Sarah, if you would proceed with the vote." Sarah nodded, her eyes flicking towards me for a brief moment, a hint of what felt like sympathy in her gaze. She began to read the motion, her voice clear and steady. "The motion is to officially remove Elias Thorne from any and all advisory positions and to approve the restructuring of the board's shareholdings to ensure maximum operational control." As she spoke, I slowly, deliberately unclasped my hands. I stood up. The sudden movement drew their attention. Arthur frowned, his smug expression faltering for a split second. The whispers around the table ceased. All eyes were on me, the man they had written off, the man they believed was broken. "Actually, Arthur," I said, my voice surprisingly calm and steady, cutting through the silence like a finely honed blade. "There's been a slight misunderstanding about the ownership structure." Arthur scoffed. "Misunderstanding? Elias, we all know you have nothing. Your shares were liquidated, your influence gone." I ignored him. I walked slowly towards the table, the documents in my lap rustling softly. The board members watched me, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion, and then to a dawning, unsettling unease. I stopped in front of Sarah, the corporate secretary, and placed my hand on the stack of documents she held. "Sarah," I said, my voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room, "could you please hold off on the vote for a moment?" Quote, she looked at me, her brow furrowed, but her hand stayed its course. I then reached into the inner pocket of my unassuming jacket and pulled out a thick binder. It was meticulously organized, filled with legal documents, transaction histories, and certified proofs of ownership. I placed it gently on the table, right next to Arthur's perfectly arranged papers. "This," I announced, my voice now resonating with an authority they had never heard before, "is the official documentation proving that I, Elias Thorne, am the legal holder of over 51% of the outstanding shares of Innovate Solutions." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the room. Arthur stared at the binder, then at me, his face paling. The smugness drained away, replaced by disbelief, then panic. The other board members exchanged wide-eyed, horrified glances. The whispers had stopped entirely, replaced by the frantic pounding of their own hearts, I imagined. I continued, my gaze sweeping across their stunned faces. "As the majority shareholder," I said, my voice steady and unwavering, "I am now the owner of this company. And my first official act as owner is to exercise my right to terminate the employment of every single individual currently sitting on this board." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their betrayal and my impending justice. The performance was over, the masks had fallen, and the true show was about to begin. The silence in the boardroom was deafening, a stark contrast to the cacophony of shocked gasps and stammered denials that erupted moments later. Arthur, the usual architect of such theatrics, looked like he had swallowed a particularly indigestible invoice. His jowls quivered, his carefully coiffed hair seemed to wilt, and the smug satisfaction that had been his constant companion for the past 2 years had evaporated, leaving behind a ghastly pallor. 51%? He sputtered, his voice a reedy squeak that was a far cry from his usual booming pronouncements. That's impossible. We ensured all your assets were liquidated. Every last share accounted for." I leaned forward, my hands resting on the binder. "Ah, Arthur, that's where your fundamental error lay. You accounted for what you thought I owned, not what I was capable of acquiring. And you relied on the assumption that a man publicly declared bankrupt would simply disappear into obscurity." I gestured to the binder. "This is the culmination of 2 years of meticulous work. 2 years of operating in the shadows while you all celebrated your Pyrrhic victory. The corporate secretary, Sarah, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear, clutched the motion papers. She looked at Arthur, then at me, her loyalty clearly in flux. The motion, I continued, my voice now laced with a controlled steel that had been honed by years of careful planning, is to terminate the employment of every individual on this board. Effective immediately. I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. You see, Arthur, your consolidation of ownership structure was based on a false premise. The majority ownership no longer resides with your rather self-serving consortium. Another board member, a sharp-featured woman named Eleanor, who had always been particularly vocal about my supposed incompetence, found her voice. This is a sham. You can't just do this. There are legal ramifications. We'll contest this. Quote. I offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. Oh, believe me, Eleanor, every transaction in this binder is meticulously documented, legally sound, and has been verified by top-tier legal counsel. Your legal ramifications will be directed at yourselves, I suspect, once the dust settles and you realize the extent of your miscalculations. Arthur finally seemed to regain a sliver of his bluster. We will see about that, Thorne. This is our company. We built this from the ground up. Quote. No, Arthur, I corrected him, my gaze unwavering. You latched onto something I built from the ground up, and you proceeded to systematically dismantle it with your greed and incompetence. I tapped the binder. Your decisions over the past 2 years, the aggressive cost-cutting that drove away our top talent, the abandonment of crucial R&D projects, the pursuit of short-term gains at the expense of long-term sustainability, these were not the actions of capable leaders. They were the actions of desperate men and women scrambling to salvage what they could from a ship they were sinking. I stood up fully, my silhouette stark against the city skyline outside. The room, once filled with their self-important pronouncements, was now a tableau of stunned silence and dawning horror. My advisory capacities were terminated because you feared my vision, my ability to innovate. You saw me as a threat to your control, your access to the company's coffers. But you underestimated me. You underestimated my resilience. You underestimated my understanding of this very ecosystem you so carelessly presided over. I walked around the table, stopping behind Arthur. His breath hitched. The irony, Arthur, is that in your haste to remove me, you created the perfect environment for my return. The market's perception of instability, driven by your questionable leadership, pushed the stock price down. Every dip was an opportunity for me to acquire more at a bargain. Every panicked sale by a disgruntled employee was a stepping stone for my plan. I moved to Eleanor, whose face was now a mask of pure dread. Your operational autonomy, Eleanor, was built on a foundation of sand. You treated Innovate Solutions like a personal piggy bank, forgetting that its true value lay in its people, its ideas, and its future. And you, my dear Eleanor, were one of the most vocal proponents of slashing the very departments that generated that future. I continued this slow, deliberate procession, each board member meeting my gaze with a mixture of fear and disbelief. They had been so self-assured, so convinced of their victory, that they had failed to see the invisible currents shifting beneath them. The brokers, the anonymous directors, the labyrinth of shell companies, they were all pieces on a grand chessboard, Arthur. And you, all of you, were merely pawns. You played your roles perfectly, unknowingly fueling my ascent with every decision you made. I returned to the head of the table, standing opposite Arthur. So as of this moment, I am the sole owner of Innovate Solutions. And as the owner, I have the sole authority to make decisions regarding its future. That future, I assure you, will be very different from the one you were steering us towards. I gestured to Sarah. Sarah, please begin the process of initiating termination procedures for all board members, effective immediately. Ensure their severance packages are calculated according to their contracts, with absolutely no bonuses or performance incentives. They've earned their FOGL performance, haven't they? Quote. Sarah, her hand trembling, nodded mutely. She began to gather the papers, her movements quick and efficient, as if eager to distance herself from the unfolding catastrophe. Arthur finally found his voice, a desperate plea. "Elias, please, you can't do this. Think of the company, think of the employees. We'll be ruined." Quote, "You are ruined, Arthur," I stated flatly, "and the company? The company will thrive. It will innovate again. It will regain the spark that you so carelessly extinguished. The employees will have a leader who respects their contributions and values their expertise. They will have a leader who actually believes in the mission of Innovate Solutions." I picked up the binder, holding it like a trophy. Your arrogance was your undoing. Your belief that you could strip a man of his creation and leave him powerless was your fatal mistake. You saw my public persona of defeat, and you accepted it as the truth. You never once considered the possibility of a meticulously crafted comeback. You never accounted for the fact that the man you discarded was a visionary, not just in technology but in strategy. The tension in the room was palpable. Some board members were openly weeping. Others stared blankly, their minds clearly struggling to process the seismic shift in power. Arthur sat frozen, his face a study in utter defeat. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I said, my voice softening slightly, not out of pity, but out of a sense of profound finality. "I have a company to rebuild, and a lot of work to do. Sarah will guide you out. Please, don't linger. I have a board meeting to run, and this time it will be with a new set of faces." I turned and walked towards the door, the hum of my footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. As I reached the threshold, I paused and looked back. They were still seated, a collection of broken individuals, their dreams of corporate conquest shattered. Arthur, his head in his hands, looked like a statue carved from despair. "Oh, and Arthur," I added, a genuine smile finally gracing my lips. "One more thing. Those liquidation figures you thought were so accurate? They were deliberately inflated. A small parting gift to ensure you had enough capital to facilitate my continued acquisition of shares without raising suspicion. You were, in essence, funding your own downfall." With that, I stepped out, closing the door behind me. The polished oak doors of Innovate Solutions no longer felt like a tomb entrance. They felt like the gateway to a renaissance. The whispers would now be of my return, of my triumph. The sidelong glances would be of awe, not malice. They thought I was broke. They were about to learn that I was simply playing a much, much longer game. The phantom investor had returned, not to haunt, but to reclaim. The architect of their undoing was now the master builder of a new era. The story of Elias Thorne was far from over. It was just beginning its most spectacular chapter.